Hey, Sam, you come up with that intro line?
You didn't tell me that was today.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Writer's Room with Sam and Jim. This is the show where we bring aspiring writers to our little writer's room here on the air to help them work out and develop their story. And we're going to do that with Macenzie Rebelo in just a minute. But before that, I have something I want to get off my chest. Hold on, Sam. So I want to talk about the Lord of the Rings.
What?
Except I don't really want to talk about the Lord of the Rings.
Which is amazing because you practically speak Elvish. So.
The thing about the Lord of the Rings is it's huge IP, right? And it's great IP. They made great movies out of it, and Amazon has paid a serious chunk of money for the rights to use that world without even really getting property attached to it, right?
And by IP, of course, you mean intellectual property.
Intellectual property, right? This is the world of novels and graphic novels and anything else that exists outside of Hollywood, that even articles in newspapers or blogs or maybe a writer's podcast that they feel they want to turn into some sort of a film or TV property, right? And that's great. Like, The Lord of the Rings made a ton of money for everybody involved, and that's wonderful. But as we both know, we're living in a world right now in television where unless IP is attached to it, or unless it's some, variation, one of the 50 variations on a hospital show, everybody wants IP on a TV show. You can't, if you walk in and you have just an idea of your own, it's a very hard sell.
Right. Especially, by the way, in genre.
Especially in genre.
In genre, it's hard. Sci-fi, supernatural, you need a book. You need something.
Yeah, I just recently watched a show on Netflix called Warrior Nun, which I thought has a very nifty. It has good self-contained mythology within the show. It's kind of fun. For some reason, it reminds me of Highlander, which I loved years ago when I was first watching that. But it's kind of contemporary. It's shot in Europe, so it has some fun European things going on. I was raised Catholic. It's very Catholic, nuns. But it's good, right? And it's all based on a graphic novel. I don't know the exact name. I assume it was called Warrior Nun. But how many people bought that graphic novel? I'd never heard of it before I heard of the show. I'm sure it had fans.
Right.
10,000, 100,000. I don't know.
Now, we should back up to say the reason you're talking about how many fans they had is one of the big advantages to intellectual property is, of course,
the whole point of basing a TV show on some piece of IP, one would think, is that there's some big fan base out there dying for the next Stephen King show. And you deliver a Stephen King show, and all kinds of Stephen King people are like, ooh, I can't wait to see that, right? I don't think that was true with Warrior Nun. There was some number of people. It wasn't huge. So then the question becomes, why make that show? And I think it's because there's something that in the process of making a show, in development, that everyone can look at and say, oh, that's what it is. I know what it is. And they would rather trust that than trust a bunch of writers, other writers, writers who actually write television, to come up with a TV show. They would rather look at some other property that's already completed and trust that to make a TV show than to trust TV writers to make a TV show.
Because if the intellectual property isn't big enough, and it's not like you're coming in, you're walking with, this is a John Grisham show, this is a James Patterson show, this is a Stephen King show. All of a sudden, people are going to show up for that. But who's showing up for the little graphic novel?
That's what I'm saying. You don't have the audience part. It's purely about the development process. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is I think it's time for a rethink on that front. Right? Because if we got to the point, and again, I'm saying I like Warrior Nun. I've got nothing against it. But in this plundering of the cabinets for every IP out there you could possibly turn into a TV show, we're getting down to things that they're not bringing an audience, right? The only thing they bring is that, there's some amount of pre-digested content, right? Some story you can look at. But even then, a lot of the times, that story isn't actually good TV story. It needs to be adapted. It needs to be changed.
It's huge change that has to happen.
Right? I think I read somewhere Warrior Nun was actually set in New York City. Well, now it all takes place in Spain.
Right.
Which actually feels really good for the atmosphere of the show, and it gives it some unique things you can look at on screen. But all that to say, if you're going to change everything about it, what is it you're really buying? And what you're really buying, I think, in that case, is confidence. You say, you can touch something tangible and say there's a finished thing here that I can talk about in a meeting, and everyone can look at it and feel some relief. They're not betting on just thoughts coming out of Sam Ernst's head.
Yeah, well, I don't think you should ever bet solely on that, but
Well, okay, so what if there's two of us, right?
Well, I think also there are beautiful ideas out there that can be affected beautifully, and if the pitch is good and the presentation is great, you can start fresh. And so I know that there are some writers who are like, maybe I should write this as a book first.
Well, I was going to bring
which is nuts.
I was going to bring that up because you and I have talked about that. We have talked about writing books. We've talked about doing graphic novels as a way to get interesting, complicated ideas that we have out into the world in a way that we can then bring it in. People will go, oh, now I get it.
Right, which is nuts.
It's nuts, right?
But that is the state of the world that we live in right now.
And that's my rant. I just wanted to say I can't change it. We can't do anything about it.
No.
I understand, right? Before they spend $100 million on something, they want a safety blanket. They want to know what's going to happen.
Right. Here's this other thing that looks very little like what we're actually going to make, but here's something.
Here's something. So at least you got something.
Now, this rant has nothing to do with the fact that we have this huge spec script that we're just putting the finishing touches on that has no IP and is sci-fi.
As far as I know, that's correct. I will admit nothing about that.
Always a good policy.
Yeah, okay, so we got to find a book to adapt. Okay, let's get into this week's show.
Hi, Macenzie. Welcome to the Writers' Room with Sam and Jim. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Macenzie. It's Jim. Glad to have you here.
Hi.
Before we get into your idea, I want to talk about, this is right now in Hollywood, obviously, there's a huge and necessary course correction, which is more diverse writers. And of course, when we're talking about diverse writers, we're talking about gender, and we're talking about race, and we're talking about ethnicity. But there's something that we don't talk a lot about, and that is a lens that you bring to this. And I really want to talk about that because it's so important. Can we talk about that? Talk about the illness that you deal with and how that affects your writing and how you think about it?
Yeah, for sure.
So you have lupus, which Jim's sister has lupus. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but we did. And
I was going to say it myself.
well, then I'm really happy I said it for you. And do you write about that at all? Do you have a different lens on the world because of that? I'm sure you do. And how does that work?
So I haven't written any scripts about it just yet because it feels still a bit too close to home because I was only diagnosed with it about 3 years ago, and I've been in remission for 3 years. So
good for you.
Yeah, sometimes writing about it from another character can be a bit difficult, but I have written a personal essay just based off my own experience with it, and that was actually published in the Canadian Lupus newsletter this March, and that was really exciting for me. It was really healing, and it was a nice way to kind of combine my both worlds.
Being someone who was recently diagnosed with a serious illness like that, how do you feel as a writer that it affects the way you're looking at the world when you are thinking about your characters and what kind of stories you want to tell?
Yeah, it definitely changed my perspective because before I was diagnosed, you're always told to write based off experiences. So I thought I would, by 23, have a whole lifelong of fun, crazy, wild experiences. And now that I'm 23 and, I really haven't had that opportunity because of my illness. A lot of the time I do have to stay home. I even can't drink. I just have a lot of things stopping me. So I kind of have to go about it a different way.
Right.
But it's not really, I wouldn't say it's really stopping me because it's just providing me a new way to think about things. So in a way, it's kind of granted me a unique way of opportunities to figure things out.
It's interesting, and I just want to say Jim and I were laughing because any 23-year-old who says, I'm 23, I've had a million experiences, I can write about anything, we're like, oh, yes, I remember being 23 and thinking that too.
And I think we told this story on the podcast. That's why we went to open restaurants because we realized we had nothing to write about at 23.
That's right. But your point, of course, was very different, which is you got sidelined from that, and that is a very interesting and unique perspective on it. Just listening to you, I don't know that it doesn't have to be specific to lupus. It could be anybody that is sidelined from the life that they expected. You have a unique perspective on that. I mean, you can feel it. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
It's something I think that we can guess at. I mean, it's a universal feeling of being excluded or feeling angry of, it's not fair, all that stuff. But you're living it. I think that's really going to help be a huge perspective. Are you shying away from that, do you think, in your writing? Or are you ready to write about that?
I honestly don't know because sometimes when I write, I don't realize that I'm doing it. until maybe somebody points it out to me. And I think in a lot of ways, I do write characters that are suffering with some sort of ailment, whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally. And I kind of find a way to weasel my experiences in there.
Right.
But I haven't written a character who suffers from a physical disease or disability quite yet. I've only written stuff about characters who struggle with like mental things currently.
I think it's actually a great toolbox, because one of the things you certainly can write to, something that is very concretely similar to your own experience in a direct way. But I'm sure it's informing your experience of life, and what you notice and sort of the emotional flavor that events have is probably different now for you than it was 3 years ago. And just noticing that difference is the kind of thing you bring to characters when
100%.
you put a character through a ringer, and suddenly they're looking at the world in a different way, and you have that experience of having your perspective forcibly changed on you.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely think I'm good at writing characters who feel that they're on the outside, just because for so long I was, I had to stay inside, couldn't really go out, couldn't do things without my mom.
Right.
I can definitely write characters who feel like they've lost touch with themselves or a part of themselves that they used to have that sort of independence, and now it's gone.
I mean, I kind of think that's your superpower here right now. It's not that you don't have other superpowers. It's not the totality of you, of course, but that is a really unique lens, and that is, it's huge. And you're right. You don't have to write about somebody. You could apply that to other situations that you've never lived in, but the emotional truth of it is readily at hand for you, in a way that maybe it isn't for everybody.
I think it's what they call a dark gift, or finding the, finding the silver lining. And okay, well, your situation is what it is, but it does give you things that other people don't necessarily have to bring to the table. It's kind of awesome.
So I wouldn't recommend this course of this path, and I'm sure you wouldn't either, Macenzie. But this is the very thing that you're saying, where it is starting to inform your characters in a non-direct way, is the most interesting part of it, of how it works. I really don't think that if you bring in a person of color, they don't want to be answering every color question. They don't want you to turn to them every time. Nonetheless, it's going to inform however, and I imagine everybody experiences their color or their ethnicity as they grow up differently. It's going to be unique to them, but it's going to inform their voice, and in ways that we cannot understand. And that's why it's another reason why it's so important to get this incredibly diverse room to go in. We hope to get a much more authentic and dynamic show out of the whole thing.
And it is something where at 23, you actually do have a set of experiences to bring to the table that is unique and far beyond what people your age normally have to bring.
Yeah.
At least more than we had to bring when we were 23.
I shouldn't expand that too much. We had nothing.
We got nothing. I mean, high school, college, a case of beer and a bong is not really life experience. All right, so let's jump into Macenzie's idea. Tell us about the idea, and then tell us also the format, like hour drama, half hour comedy, whatever it is that it is.
Sure. My script is a series. It's about an hour long, and it's a drama and thriller. It takes place in modern time in some small town somewhere. It's called Sin. And basically, it's a story about Helen Sins. She's a washed-up true crime author who returns to her hometown the exact same day of a high-profile murder. And her life is turned around when she becomes a main suspect in the murder by a mere coincidence. And then throughout the story, she has to investigate the crime in order to prove her innocence to the community and to clear her name.
Right on. So the first of all, the shows that have existed, two that I can think of right now, about mystery writers who solve mysteries, right? Of course, there's Murder, She Wrote, which
a classic
in Maine, and by Maine I mean Burbank, California, but nonetheless Maine. And then of course I don't know that I've ever seen a single episode of Murder, She Wrote. And then there's Castle, and Castle's the current one. So this is great because the lens and why did you pick this? I mean, what drew you to this story?
It's based off of my own experience with like family and secrets, and to what extent is a secret doing good? Is it doing good, or is it doing more damage? Within my own family, there was secrets, and when a certain person found out about it, they were more hurt by the family keeping a secret from them rather than the truth just being out there. And then I kind of just took like a dark turn on it.
Were you there when the secret was revealed?
So it was actually, I found out about it before this other person did, and this person still doesn't know about it.
Oh my God.
And it's just one of those things where like they may go their whole lives without knowing about it. And it's kind of like everybody knows about it. The community knows, but this one person. So that's kind of what it's about. Is it doing more good than harm than good by keeping this secret?
Wow. Yeah. Okay. We're not asking you because we're trying to be respectful, but yeah, we'll be calling you tomorrow and the next day.
Oh yeah,
and the
I know.
next day.
That on its own is a crazy story.
Yeah, we're gonna take this off air.
Yeah, but the family secrets is great. So what is this woman's family? What is this woman's secret? Are you saying she has one? Jessica, isn't that the lead? And I don't know how I know that from Murder, She Wrote. But what's this woman's name?
So her name is Helen Sims.
Helen.
Helen
Okay.
Sims.
And she basically is returning back home to her estranged mother for her stepdad's funeral. And while she's back in town, a murder of a high-profile, famous family, they're found shot dead in their home. And basically, the day of, Helen returns back to her home and accidentally lights the crime scene on fire with a loose cigarette butt, and she becomes a suspect because they find her butt and her DNA is attached to the crime scene. And then through investigating the murder, she discovers secrets about her own family and how her mother is connected to this random, estranged, rich couple.
So just to ask a question here, because I was wondering whether this was episodic in that, it's murder of the week, so to speak, or does her involvement in this one murder is going to, it sounds like it's bringing her into things that involve her family, her community, and she's going to be following a trail for seasons?
Yeah, so it's kind of loosely inspired by Sharp Objects or like Big Little Lies. So it's kind of like it follows one big mystery, but by the end you also discover a whole bunch of like secrets about every character.
That's great. That's a Big Little Lies is 100. I mean, both are, but you're right. Those are good examples. And how many episodes is Big Little Lies? Like 6 or 8, something like that.
I think it's 8 episodes. Yeah.
And you're right. When you go digging in things, you find out all sorts of things. There's no question. I mean, when I was looking for the tape measure, I found all sorts of truths about someone in my house. So I can only imagine what's going to happen here. So what's the tone of it? I mean, she threw a cigarette butt and lit a house on fire. We immediately start laughing.
It sounded faintly comedic.
Right. So are you trying to have a little humor in there? Is she kind of a ditz? What is she? Is she kind of smart? But tell me about Helen.
So Helen is a very chaotic character. She has a really bad relationship with her mother. They don't talk. She is a true crime author, but she's washed up. She hasn't made a hit in a long time. And she just recently got publicly divorced from her husband, who is also a very famous true crime author. So when she returns home, she's kind of like in the big dump of her life. Nothing's going right. And she drives by this old house where the crime scene was, and she's just kind of looking at it because she's nosy. And this was her job for so long. And she just lights a cigarette and ashes it out on the grass, and then it just starts to catch. And she panics and drives away, not like hoping that this will just, be a fluke. And then she goes home and turns on the TV and sees that there's a crime scene and everything's on fire and the police are there.
All right. So hold on. Let me interrupt you because I don't want to get into plot yet. We want to talk about Helen. And you used a beautiful word that I know Jim loved, which is chaotic. Right? Yeah. Jim's nodding his head because you described a woman or a person, a character, as chaotic, which is great. And there's and you also said she's back on her game, right? I mean, she's off her game, right? Yeah. So her husband is kicking her ass her ex-husband is kicking her ass in writing. So she's failing right now as far as she's concerned. Plus, she's chaotic. She's all over the place. So I imagine her mother is not chaotic and all over the place, and or maybe she is, but we're looking for conflict. And she's actually making things worse. Does she see investigating the crime as a way back or as a redemption or anything like that?
Yeah, so the thing that really starts that gear in motion is she has an agent named Mika, who's also her ex-husband's agent, and he basically gives her a proposition saying, if you don't start a new book, I'm going to have to drop you because you're not making me any money.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she goes back home, this murder's all over the news, and he calls her and he says, if you don't take this case, then you're basically, you're screwing up. So that's what prompts her to be like, well, I'm here, I might as well.
So she's writing about a murder that she is accused of committing.
Basically, yeah.
And she must have some connection to the victim then.
Yeah.
And what is it?
We learned this in like the end of the first episode, but the neighbors are a rich family. Their daughter was her childhood best friend, but they lost touch when high school started.
Okay.
So what's the relationship, though? Did you get a relationship into that, Jim, that I missed?
Best friend. High school.
Just high school best friend. But what's their connection? Why are they best friends? What was the relationship like? Because that's what you're going to start mining, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'd be curious about. It can't be just that he's a best friend. That's too. There's something else. Did they? I'm not pitching this, but did they conceive a child together and put it up for adoption because of some drunken night? Is he gay? And she was. He was.
His beard.
She was. She maybe, and she was also his confidant. What's the electricity between them that's interesting more than we're just best friends, right? Because why would she kill a best friend? Why would anybody think she would kill a best friend?
It's actually the best friend's parents that have passed. The best friend's still alive.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So the reason why it's kind of like a conflict of interest is because she was close with this person and they just lost touch. And now all of a sudden she's investigating her parents' murder.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And it's like she hasn't even reached out to her about the murder. The daughter, she kind of just went MIA after high school, and like they never heard from each other again. So they kind of have to like reunite in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to make it so that there's lots of tension because they were best friends and then they just stopped talking out of the blue.
I'm kind of curious. I'm looking at a pattern in the relationships here. She's lost touch with her mother, and yet she returns for her stepfather's funeral, which is interesting to me. Like my gut goes to, because she liked him better. Right, like that kind of thing, right? But it's interesting, and she's returning to the scene of abandoned relationships where in the how many years have gone by? Do you think 10, 15?
Yeah, long time, 10 years probably.
Okay, yeah. So all this time has gone by, and these people have reconceived their lives. They've conceived opinions of her, and now she is finding new ways to connect with them and figure out who they've become, including her mother.
I mean, my question is, what's cool about this? What do you like about this? Because right now, okay, there's some plot structures, and I love the fact that she's chaotic and over the place. But what's cool about it? Why? What's the thing that's really grabbing you?
It's kind of flashback into the past where she gets little flashbacks while she's coming back home of these like traumatic memories she's had with her mother, because her mother's very abusive towards her. Her mother's been hiding this secret about who her father really is, the identity of her father. And she has like these flashbacks of like a man, and she only sees specific angles of him, never of his face. So the closer she gets back home, the more triggered she becomes. And then she also reveals to wear this wig at one point during the first episode, and she's completely bald, and we don't really know why. And then we learn by the end of the episode that her mother made her pull out her hair as punishment.
Okay.
So it's kind of like,
all right.
Yeah.
All right.
So you can see where this is a comedy.
Yeah, it's definitely a comedy.
All right. That got dark really fast.
That's okay. If it's a dark show, it's a dark show, and it doesn't mean it can't have humor in dark. By the way, those can somewhat live together. They're tricky. It's definitely tricky, but that's okay. What I like about it is, she pulled out all her own hair. That's cool, right? That's wild. That's terrible, and all of that. You can lead to that when we're talking about it. Lead to that when you're thinking about it. Don't worry about the plot points that get you there.
You have great specificity, right? I can tell you've been thinking about this, and a lot of the thoughts you have are like, they're at minimum interesting. Right. And some of them like that are really like, it opens doors to very interesting scenes, images that aren't commonly seen in TV.
Right. Yeah. And it's hard for her to go home, right? And why is it, how do we know it's hard for her to go home?
At the beginning of the episode, she mentions to her agent that she found out about her stepfather's death through her cousin because her mom didn't even tell her. So we know, like, right from the get-go that her and her mom just don't talk.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the plane ride there, she's having kind of flashbacks because the closer she's getting to home, she's more faced with the surface of reality. And then we learn through the way home that this is a very tight-knit community and everybody kind of knows everybody. And Helen just kind of sticks out like a sore thumb because, they all know she left.
They all know she left. I get the idea that everyone's looking at her, and you get that oppressive small town thing. There's no question about that. We mind that for a lot of episodes in Haven, and we like small town stuff. So you are in our ballpark as far as fans go.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the fact that she left, I think there's a lot more to mine there, right?
Okay.
I mean, there's something we want to really find out what sort of huge event. And by the way, when I mean huge to her, it doesn't have to be she accidentally blew up half the town. I mean, something, maybe I'm just pitching, but did something happen that drove her from the town?
Right. What happened the night she left?
Oh, yeah.
Like that kind of thing.
That whole thing where her hair, she pulled out her own hair. Was it just all about her mother, or was it more than that? Was it the thing that she witnessed in the town? Was it that she went to walk through school with her, or walked through the town with all of her hair pulled out by her hand, bloodied, a mess, and everybody saw it and it became public? I mean, what happened? We want to turn that up, in my opinion, to like 11 because it'll make it easier for you. And you're like, you got it almost there. And that's why I asked you, what's the cool stuff? Because once you figure out what's cool, that's that. And I mean, cool, I mean, is also terrible, right? For her.
Yeah.
But that, if it's terrible for her, it's beautiful for you.
Okay.
Don't you think?
Okay.
I was going a different way, slightly from what Sam was talking about, because I was wondering, like, wait, her mother was so abusive she tore out her hair. Did no one notice? Right? Like, it feels like she must have some secret sympathizers in this town. Small towns are famous for having secrets. One of Sam's things he says about coming to Minnesota after being in New York is it's all exactly the same stuff going on. There's just this veneer over the top of it where people don't talk about it.
Sure.
They pretend that there's something more virtuous in the small town world, and it's not really true. But I'm just wondering about those other pieces of her life that are going to surface that affect this story. I love the taking the hair out thing because it's a very stark and impactful kind of
visual,
right?
Yeah.
Like you can see it, and it's really kind of grim.
Mm-hmm.
Who else does she encounter from her past who's aware of that? I mean, were other people aware of the way her mother was treating her?
As of right now, no. She's not very close to many people because of her past, but the only character she's very close to would be her cousin, named JJ. And he doesn't know because it's such a shameful secret. So for what I was planning on happening was she just didn't tell anybody. The wig was something that was like secret to her. So it was almost like a ritual for her to keep it on, and the way she put it on and the way she cleaned it, because it was like her sense of normality, that this was the one thing that nobody really knew about. So it was hers.
Or at least she thought no one knew about it.
Right.
That's because
that's a turn.
The event has to, I mean, the fact that she had her hair, she pulled out her own hair, it has to have an actual impact on the place.
Yeah.
If it's just internal damage, that can be okay too, but I think it should be more than that. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Because there's a lot of ways to go, and I don't mean to be prescriptive.
Right.
But what I'm trying to point out is we don't want it all to be internal. And and there has to be, because it's hard to write. And then the question is, what is the cost of coming back to this town to her? That's the thing I'm most interested in now that you've brought up this huge thing that happened.
And what is the cost of the town? Because it feels like she's making a conscious decision to come back to this place. It doesn't sound like she has ties here anymore, right? And if, the stepfather's death is an excuse at a certain level because he's gone, she's not even reconnecting with him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just waiting in the way you're describing this character for her to become the bomb that goes off and shatters things in this town. A la, like you're talking about, the shows you were discussing. I don't quite see it yet, but I feel like she is going to be the ball in the paint can as the things that caused her pain and the secrets that have been kept involving her come out.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it does. It makes total sense.
And I think the thing that's really cool about this is you've given her an agenda from the start.
Yeah.
It's very important to her to be a successful author. And this is a path back. That's beautiful. That's an engine, right? She's got to solve the crime. So she can write the book, so she can redeem herself in her own eyes and in the eyes of her, and beat her ex-husband, or at least equal him, and that's great. But that would be true for anybody, right? Mm-hmm. So now my question to you is, why does she need to write this book, right? Why is that success so important? I'm not looking to justify it. I'm saying there's some good stuff in there, right?
Yeah.
And it feels like you're hinting at that this family that was murdered has some ties to her secrets as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And?
Basically, when she writes the book or through writing the book, she kind of ends up writing her own sort of life story. And then all the secrets, all the questions she had growing up are answered by the end of the book. And it becomes a sort of memoir of her own life, and she didn't even realize that's what it would be. When she started out writing, this investigation, she had no inclination that the story would end, and it would be about her.
Okay.
That's kind of what ends up happening.
That's lovely. And I think you know my question, which is how do we see that? I mean, that's a book, and that would be great. Yeah. But how do we see that? How do we represent all of that?
I guess throughout the progression of the story, more characters are introduced. And we learn about a covered up death that happened in the 80s and how that death relates back to Helen. And then she uncovers a whole other box of secrets through that. And it's like basically like a tangled up web of all these secrets and corruption in this one little small town. And her family is a big part of that. And it kind of connects everything, and everything kind of makes sense by the end.
I can tell you've thought about this a lot.
Yeah, sure I have.
The thing I've been wondering since you first brought up the idea was how exactly you described her as chaotic. And I think for some reason I keep thinking of Weeds and the Mary Louise Parker character as an example of that kind of character who you never quite knew what she was going to do and making somewhat random decisions sometimes, or being sparked by some sort of internal genius to want to do something. And this has a different feel to me. This feels a little bit more like the person who shows up drunk at their high school reunion and is walking around saying stuff and revealing things that other people thought were long ago hidden and put away. And it's creating chaos in her wake. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, what does it look like for her to be chaotic returning to this world?
She's kind of just like a shit disturber. Everyone's at peace in that town. Everybody kind of minds their business, smile and nods. Like you said, a veneer, and she's there to basically, if she's gonna write this book, she's gonna do it, and she's gonna do it justice. And she's going through all this, basically hitting trash and pulling up all these secrets that people purposely buried in deep. And she's riling up others, trying to get this information out, including her own family. She's causing even more tension with her mother than she had before, because now she's asking her mother all these questions that growing up her mom avoided. She never answered these questions. And now she's looking her face to face saying, no, I want to know who this is. Where's my father? Stuff like that.
So is she going with a drive that is, this is do or die for me, my publisher's going to drop me, or my agent's going to drop me, all that kind of stuff. And she's just intentionally laying the wrecking ball to people's lives to get to the truth of this stuff?
Pretty much. It doesn't start that way at first, but then once she accidentally makes herself one of the main suspects due to the fire, she really, makes it her mission to prove herself innocent and to figure out who did it, because now she looks like the number one culprit when it wasn't her at all.
All right. Well, let's step back for a minute, because the thing we don't want to write is the series.
Okay.
You only want to write the pilot. So
it sounds like you know plenty about the series to say whatever you might have to say about that if the occasion comes up.
Yeah, and also I would steal the good stuff from from the series and pull it into the pilot. Not too much of it, but don't save anything.
Don't save anything.
And the thing that I'm worried about is there's a lot of structures and engines and we're going to find out cool stuff, but I don't care because it's episode 5 of a series that doesn't exist. So I would propose you make that future you problems when you sell this project and they say, all right, here's your writing staff. Let's go figure out the next episodes. Great. Mm-hmm. But until that beautiful day, you just need a pilot.
Okay.
So what is she comes into town. What's the last scene of the pilot? Do you know? What's the big thing? Forget scene. What's the big turn at the end of the pilot? Where are we going?
Yeah. The big turn at the end of the pilot is after the funeral, she returns back home to her mom's house, and she's going through her stepdad's room or work room and just, cleaning it up. It used to be her bedroom growing up. And she goes through the closet and finds a little shoebox, and she opens it and she finds some baby things, and in there she finds a baby book, and she goes through the baby book and she finds that her birth certificate is missing, and that kind of sparks a little thought in her head that's kind of weird. That triggers a flashback for her that reveals to the audience that the reason why she lost all of her hair was because her mother used to make her pull it out. So that kind of is like the big twist at the end.
We find out that her mother made her pull out her hair.
Yeah.
I don't know how the birth certificate connects to that. I got fuzzy there, but it doesn't matter. I just want to know. So that's what we find out. Why is that a big deal?
Because it kind of reveals to the audience why her relationship with her mother is so bad. I don't really explain it from the get-go. You just know that they don't talk, but there's no explanation to why. And then at the end, we see that, okay, clearly this mom was abusive towards the daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and pardon me for this, but is there some world where we're thinking like she has cancer throughout the first episode, and then we find out, no, it was really abuse at the end of the episode? Something like that?
You mean in the flashbacks, you mean? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know what it has to do with the flashbacks.
Well, because you can't see, you're saying you want to see
wearing,
her as a little girl.
She's wearing a wig, right?
Is she still wearing a wig today?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. I missed that part.
That's what I'm saying. So she's walking around and we're seeing this bald woman who has a wig, and we're thinking, oh, she's returned home. She has a terminal illness, and she is going to do whatever she's going to do, stir up the shit, confront people, whatever that is. And I have a perspective on that is going to be radically changed when I find out that her mother made her pull her hair out when she was a child.
That's right. That's huge.
Yeah, it's not like we don't know for sure what it is. It could be cancer. It could be alopecia. It could be really anything. And then it's revealed at the end.
That's great. So here's my big pitch. That should be the end of Act 1.
Oh, okay.
Because there's not enough story. It's not it's a nice fat turn, but it doesn't change the trajectory of the story.
It's a character beat.
It's a reveal. It's not something that's actively happening.
And it helps as an end of Act 1 kind of thing, because now I understand this fundamental piece about her relationship to her mother, which says something about the mother and stepfather, which says something about town and why she's not here. And that's the kind of thing that it helps to have early on, because now you're watching the rest of the pilot through the lens of, oh, shit, she's come back to a place that really, this is painful for her. There's dark stuff buried beneath.
Exactly. And I am infinitely more interested. That's why we ask for what the cool stuff is, because you want to get the cool stuff up front. They are not going to get to page 50 if it's not in there early. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't want to mess up your story, but actually what I find, and Jim and I find, is if you pull that stuff up early, you're going to come up with more cool stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now you're like, oh my God, this relationship with now, next time I see her mother and her with the mother, I'm on edge the whole time.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And you were going to do that in episode 2, I would imagine. And I'm like, but there is no episode 2. And I want that
That's
moment.
right.
Episode 2 through 8 does not exist.
Every time we write a pilot, Sam's thing is, there is no episode 2.
Right.
And he's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is no episode 2.
And which, by the way, is dangerous, because in our case, we're trying to create a show on the air to make an episode 2. I'm like, that is future us problem.
That is future us problem.
And there's many ideas, and when we have to come up with episode 2, there's other writers too to do it. But that's what we need early. And by the way, now I'm starting to understand why this woman might be chaotic.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
And it excuses and explains behaviors we might have seen her do.
Right.
And it might make me even root for her to be rude to someone. I may not even understand why she's up in someone's face or whatever she's doing, but I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt, because I know some bad shit has happened to her in this world.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, totally get it. Okay.
Also, when we find, finding out the birth certificate and all that stuff, that's what we call shoe leather or pipe. Maybe it's not really shoe leather, but it's just beats. And if I was giving notes to Jim, I'd be like, can we do that in fewer beats? Why is that interesting that she goes back there and she finds out? I mean, she has to be going to a place that's really terrifying for her and meaningful for her. But if you don't have, and that could be cool, and you could come up with that. But if you didn't, don't weigh yourself down with having to figure out the nuts and bolts of how she gets from A to B. Just think, what's the cool way to reveal that? And I got to tell you, I want to see the flashback of her running from the house or pulling out all her hair or her mother doing. I want to live in that for a minute.
Okay.
It's so cool.
The birth certificate for me is only really interesting if she were to go in there. If I know she loved her stepfather and hated her mother, to find out that, no, it's actually her stepmother and this guy was really her father. I don't know. Some crazy shit like that where I'm like, oh, her entire concept of herself has been turned upside down. Okay, that's an episode blow. If it's been informed by this whole pilot that's about questions of identity and her relationship to these people, that could potentially be an interesting thing to learn.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, Macenzie, do you hate us right now?
No. I'm enjoying this.
Okay.
Giving me good ideas.
Only because we're trying to latch onto your stuff and just make it land and squeeze every little bit of juice out of it, which is sometimes we have to break it to literally break it.
Okay.
But I think what Jim's saying is interesting, and it's really just an illustration to illustrate the idea of her birth certificate is only important if it actually it's not that it's big of a deal if her but we're not sure who her parents are or why it's missing.
The absence of a birth certificate doesn't say really much of anything.
Right.
It's what's on it that could
which, by the way,
matter.
Could be a perfectly fine turn in a scene in the middle somewhere. That's fine. But to end an act or end an episode with that, you really want those to be big oh shit moments. And understand what they mean. Even if you're wrong about it, by the way. How many times are there times where you end on a big cliffhanger and then you come back and then it's like, oh, they immediately, that wasn't the big deal. The big deal is actually this. And then we keep going. First, like every episode of House, 4 times.
Right. I mean, there's a world where, for example, it takes time to do a DNA and all of that. If she's come here, she's doing all this stuff to find out about the crime, and the last beat of the pilot is they arrest her because her DNA was found at the crime scene.
Right.
Right.
As long as we don't know that.
As long as we don't know that until then.
Yeah, and we don't know that it was because of the cigarette. Unless it's a tricky little bit, because if you're going to end the pilot on her being wrongfully accused, I don't know if it's enough, because I know it's wrong. I don't know what are the stakes there, because I feel like she's going to get off. There's nothing else.
Yeah. That's right. We would have to question whether or not she might actually have done it.
Right.
For that to really land as a pilot out.
So I guess what we're saying is there are the big turns, the big reveals, the cool stuff that you kind of have to grade them. Is this a small turn? Okay.
So the scene turn, is it an act out? Is it an episode out?
Yeah, because you're episode out for a serialized thing. Let me rephrase. For a pilot, because there's no coming back, you got to blow our minds a little bit there.
Okay.
Right? Where things kind of come together and we suddenly understand that we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'll be back for sure.
I mean, to go, like, as an audience member who's only hearing, what little we've heard on the podcast so far, I'm assuming she is actually related to the family that got killed, which is where there's something about her. It's not that the DNA on her cigarette, made them come arrest her for the crime. It's that the DNA on the cigarette makes her part of that family, which she never knew and no one else knew, or everyone else knew. Because I'm going to guess
that's a good twist.
I'm going to guess that pretty quick, I think, as an audience member. I'm going to be wondering if that's the mystery with birth certificates and the 2 families and all that shit.
Right.
So the sooner you turn that card, the better. But if you build it right, it can land with a lot of punch.
Okay. Yeah, I like that idea.
I mean, and again, those ideas are they're just to demonstrate. Right, because we know we're probably breaking things, and I'll tell you, this happens all the time with us, where you'll have a meeting with somebody, or let's say executives, because you have to listen to them, and they'll pull a thread out of a story, and they don't know they're pulling, and it could be a huge thread. Sometimes they think they're pulling a huge thread, and it's nothing, and so we don't know what we're pulling here, because we don't know what else you have. But again, if we're ruining something in episode 3, that doesn't count. That doesn't count. Only if it ruins it for the pilot.
If it makes you get an episode 3, it's totally worth ruining episode 3.
Exactly.
You'll figure out a new episode 3.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, do you have other characters? So are we going to meet her mom? Is her mom a monster, or is she?
Her mom sounds like a freaking nightmare.
Yes. Yeah. So obviously she's not when you meet her, or is she?
When we meet her, we meet her at the beginning of the episode. We actually meet the murdered family first. We see them the day of they get murdered, and the mother, her name is Louisa. She's having a bad interaction with Marlo, who's the woman that's murdered. They're having an argument, and then it cut to we meet Helen. So we right from the get-go, we learned that she's kind of not a very nice person. She basically tells Marlo to go drop dead, and then
and then she drops dead. Well, let me ask you a question, and I assume you may have thought about this some, but so there's a question of point of view, right? When you're writing particularly a murder mystery kind of show, generally you want to, as much as possible, only be in the point of view of the detective. Now, there's the other side of that. There are lots of shows where, or movies where you are also in the killer's point of view, and you see things happening right from them. But you just need to be very conscious of what you see from whose perspective, so that we don't learn things that are going to steal from the drama of wondering, trying to put together the mystery for ourselves. That's always half the fun for the audience.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Because just, the first thing I think when you pitch this moment of she's like, I'm going to get you, or I'm going to kill you, and then that by itself is not an interesting scene, right? So you're going to have to figure out how to make that interesting, and I have no doubt that you could. Okay. You've come up with so much cool stuff. You will come up with a cool version.
Now, her going to her mom's house and seeing the Ring doorbell footage of her mom having that conversation with this woman who just got killed, that's interesting.
Exactly, because our main character seeing it, and maybe seeing it with her mom, or her mom's about to come in right after she learns it. That's a classic, structure of, you just got some big clue and the person that's now looking suspicious comes in the room and you got to keep your shit together. I'm sure you've seen that. So,
Yeah.
do you know what we're trying to say is, like, if we're meeting some lady that we don't know who's saying something weird to some other people that we don't know,
Low value,
and that scene that's where you're going to be spending a lot of your creativity trying to figure out how to make that cool. But there are cooler ways, so you're stacking the deck against you and then having to earn it back, but you don't have to do it that way.
And just to say, to hit on something Sam was saying earlier, we have read mountains of scripts staffing for various shows over the years, and it's a cliche in Hollywood, but if that first 10 pages or so, if there's not stuff happening that makes you go, oh, that's cool. I want to know what's happening next, and I keep going, odds of me actually getting all the way through the script are low.
So you can't save it, and you can't be like, no, trust me, it's going to be good.
Okay.
I just got to lay this in. I just need to lay this little bit of exposition out. It'll be cool.
Right. Okay, lay out the exposition in an orgy then. Something.
Well, and that was the Game of Thrones things where,
right.
I would always come into the room yelling about, which is they had a scene with two characters talking about stuff I don't understand about a lord from this place and I don't remember that, and Jim would always explain it to me later. But they had an orgy in the back, and then that's all anybody's looking at it. It's totally cheating. It's not fair.
And yet it was genius.
And yet it was the most amazing show. So, but that's why they did it. That is really why they did it. And if that's not why they did it, they're lying.
I think they admitted that's what they're doing.
Yeah. We're going to have someone get murdered right behind there.
Sex position,
right,
as they called it.
So, and that's what I mean, the creativity, you could make that a good scene in that you have to find another element in there.
Right.
Like, for example, in the show, we find out about the town, and the town, this is not what you're doing, by the way, Macenzie, but let's say you steal from Shirley Jackson and it's a lottery and it's terrifying and something goes down. We're like, what the hell's this lottery? Oh my God, they're picking. Oh my God, are they going to kill somebody? And then he cut out and so, to Helen coming into town. That is by itself is an amazing scene that I just lifted from Shirley. Well, I took her whole story, but and crunched it
was
into
a short story.
One terrible scene, but one good scene. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
And Jim and I would get into this all the time, where I would get nuts, where we would throw things into a scene. It was like, and I would call it a set of conditions. Okay. In this scene, we're going to establish this. This person's going to be like this. This person's going to do this, and this person's going to do this.
And we need to learn these 5 facts.
Right. Now write a good scene. And to me, that was always backwards. It was, and it's got to be both. You're like, okay, we need to establish this, so don't let yourself off the hook.
Okay, yeah.
You got to think, oh, I think it could be cool this way. You don't have to write the whole scene. I'm not saying that. You'll do that in the draft, but figure out what's cool.
And you can consider doing it from a cinematic point of view. We've been working on this one sci-fi script for a while that we're thankfully almost finally done with. But we had a particular opening for the show that we liked, that we talked about. This is now several drafts ago. And then Sam was got kind of disgruntled about it one day, and he went off, and a couple days later we got together. He had written this entirely new, or came up with the pitch for an entirely new opening where we were in the point of view of a solar flare that's moving through the solar system, devastating things along its way. And there's a song playing over it, a kind of lovely upbeat song, while this flare is just bursting through. And it's so cinematic, and it's so simple, but I was sucked right in. Like, yes, that's exactly right. And it plays into the story as well. And it was great. And it had really nothing. There wasn't establishing characters, none of that kind of stuff, but it pulled me into the script.
Right. I get those once a year, and that was that one. But
luckily, we only write one script every 2 years. So we get 2 of those. It's great.
Yeah. Oh, were that to be true. So that's how we're trying to take the pressure off of you. You know what I mean? In terms of, don't set up a scene that sucks ahead of time so you're killing yourself to make it good. But then if you are trying to make it good, think outside the box of how I can make this scene amazing without having to establish a bunch of stuff.
Okay.
Is that I think I confused myself there. I can only imagine what I did to you. All right, so we're going to wrap things up here, but I want to say there's so many cool elements, and I have a feeling that you have a ton more on the back 7 episodes. Is that right?
Yeah, so far.
So I think the challenge is find the stuff that's really cool without burdening yourself with how you get there.
Okay,
and then, right? Because that's where it's like, you got to justify everything. You do have to get there. I'm not saying you don't have to get there, but don't worry about that now, and see what things you can pull up into the pilot. Whether it's the actual thing or something, or just that emotional truth, or that character revelation, or whatever it is. And then you can always change it, but you've already come up with it, I suspect.
It's all about the emotion at the end of the day, right? And that it's what makes the revelation that she pulled out her own hair hit so hard, because her own mother made her do it. In what you've seen in however much of the script you've read to that point, and that hits, it's, oh my God, right? Like that's a monstrous act, and I'm invested. It makes me feel a lot about these different characters. Anything you can bring that has that kind of punch into this pilot episode, do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the only thing I'm afraid of is you're now going to have a 75-page pilot. Because you pulled everything into it. But I don't think that'll happen. What do you think, Macenzie?
Yeah, it's a good idea. I really like that. I do tend to plan out too much, and that's, like you said, not a good idea, because you need to make the pilot the most important one. So I need to definitely retract my ideas and write them down and kind of number them, figure out which one should, really stand out in the pilot for sure.
Right. Which one really pulls out the character and demonstrates it to us. And I think it'll be great. And
you've got a great setting, and clearly you've thought about it a lot. In these kinds of mysteries, like, you can usually reshape things a lot, because it's about when you learn, what you learn, and how you're learning it about these people. And the fun is often in discovering the hidden relationships between various people, more than the exact clue that's dropped in that scene.
Yeah.
Listen, good luck with not only your writing, but also your illness and dealing with it.
And being in Canada,
That's great.
We're always sympathetic to Canadians.
No, she has socialized medicine. Don't even say that. This is the best thing in the world.
I'm not talking about the medicine. I'm just talking about being Canadian.
Oh, we love Canada.
I know we love Canada.
Yeah,
we'd
love
rather
Canada.
be Canadian, to be honest.
Yeah, many
we're
days.
Stuck.
And thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to us. This is really, really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Macenzie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good luck.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you.
And that's all we've got for you this week. Our producer, J.R. Zamora-Thal, is working the mixing board.
Our logo was designed by Julien Debar-Monclair, and our music was provided by Buddha-Rays out of Austin, Texas.
If you want to get in touch, we are at The Salmon Gym on Instagram and Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook and YouTube as The Writer's Room with Sam and Jim.
And if you like hanging out in the room with us, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And tell a friend, would you, so we can get JR paid. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.